Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, opinion writer and columnist, and I'm joined by
Kerry Clack, columnist, editorial writer.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
This is our Fiesta Preview Week edition of Puro Politics. I'm not sure how that's going to affect anything, but we'll work it in there somewhere.
Zero viewer or listenership.
And we're really happy today to be joined by a special guest, four-term District 8 councilman and mayoral candidate. Manny Peláez officially announced what everyone in town knew was happening, but it's official now, and that makes a difference. And that
it felt like this has been underway for months, though.
That's right.
A little bit, yeah.
So Manny Peláez, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the most cerebral show on the internet.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
I don't know if that. I'm going to take that. I don't take it. Is that you think that's?
I thought you got to the wrong building.
You do realize this is Puro Politics, right? Okay, because I don't want to. Okay, I just want to make sure on that one. But well, you know, you're the second sitting council member to officially announce that you're running for mayor. Your colleague John Courage announced fairly recently, and we keep hearing about Melissa Cabello Havrda or Adriana Rocha Garcia possibly running. I guess one of the things I'm really interested in is, you know, when I think back on previous mayoral elections, usually it's about 6 months before when we start seeing mayoral or city council candidates declaring. They kind of wait till the November, either the midterm or presidential election cycle has passed, and then you start to see candidates. This year, it's happening earlier, and obviously it's an open seat, but I'm just curious why you think and why you decided that it was important to get started earlier.
I'm looking at the world through a post-COVID lens, right? And post-COVID, we all choose different ways to be spoken to and to receive information. That information now is received digitally, right? Mm-hmm. I know that my colleague John Courage announced on the steps of City Hall. I don't think that's the way that people want to be spoken to anymore. They want to be spoken to by way of videos, by way of Greg's favorite app, TikTok, by way of they want to be spoken to, in different ways, right? Mm-hmm. I also think that there's a lot more noise than there ever was before, right? Breaking through that noise requires, I think, a longer windup in order to break through. Don't forget, we're also looking at what is going to be a presidential campaign that is going to suck the air out of the oxygen, right, this year. And on top of that, there's wars in the Middle East, right? And so there's a lot of information coming to people at once. I believe that over this next year, breaking through that noise is going to be a slow grind, but you wait too late and you risk not getting on people's frontal lobes, right, and on their radar screen. And so there was that debate on my team's part, right? Do we wait and do what we traditionally would have done pre-COVID, or do we embrace this new reality, which is people are drinking from a fire hydrant of data and images and messaging, and I think that we're living in a brave new age that requires.
Was there also some concern about having the announcement in a public space about what happened with John when it came to protests? Not being able to that.
Yeah, I've seen people mention that. No, those you're talking specifically about the ceasefire pro-Palestinian protesters, but those are the protesters of the moment. No, not really. We've had plenty of town halls and HOA meetings where they could have chosen to come and disrupt. They've chosen to come and disrupt plenty of city hall meetings. There will be plenty of public events of mine related to this campaign from which they can choose to come and disrupt. And so the option that we chose to go out on the internet was really just to hit as many people as possible on one day, right? Additionally, right, looking back, I do think whatever message John Courage was trying to pump out that day, that message was obliterated. And I think that was unfair to his family. That was unfair to, his team, unfair to the people who were standing next to him. And so everybody has a First Amendment right to express themselves however they want. They have a First Amendment right to protest. They have a First Amendment right to, to try to disrupt events. But I have a First Amendment right also to announce it my way. And that's the way I chose to do it.
I wanted to ask you about, I think one of the big issues that you and the other candidates are going to be facing over the next year, which concerns the Ready to Work program that Mayor Nirenberg put in place. It was approved by voters in 2020, a sales tax funded program. And it's moving along, I think, slower than everyone anticipated. We've had about 6,500 have enrolled, about 1,200 graduated. The expectation or the hope was that we'd have about an 80% job placement rate, I believe, and we're under 50% at this point. Mayor Nirenberg has emphasized the idea that this is a long-term effort and it's going to take a while, and not to judge things too much on the sort of the short-term results. I think you've expressed some concerns about it. I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think the program is working now, and how ways in which it's not working, and what you would envision for it if you were elected mayor.
First of all, from the outset, I'll tell you that this program is too big to fail. The voters have told us this is what they want, and they went out and and voted in large numbers, and those are numbers that we have to respect, right? And we have to remain loyal to the promise that we made, which is to carry out their wishes. That program must succeed. I think that everybody is frustrated with the fact that, we're still below 1,000 people employed, right? Yes, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the pipeline. And I'm sure that Mayor Nirenberg would love to have a lot more people employed. He is, and I don't think it's unfair to say, he's a true believer in two things. One is never letting perfection be the enemy of the good, right? And as am I. You'll hear me say that from the dais quite frequently. And two, it's to set bold goals and work towards them aggressively. I commend him for sticking to that, right, and for leading with optimism in this instance. I will also tell you that I was created in a test tube somewhere in Toyota, right, and in my prior career, every single day, what they would beat into us was, at Toyota, you have to question everything all the time. There's no sacred cows. And that incremental, continuous improvement is only achieved when you ask why, right? And I am, there was an august publication of many, many, many years ago where their logo was no sacred cows. You remember that? Right? I really do believe that that's important, right? For us to not be afraid to criticize any program and then to challenge ourselves to improve it. I think Ready to Work is imperfect, as are we, and as is everybody who's working on it. I think the goal is perfect, but I think it's imperfect, and it's our job every single day to sort of polish up those facets of that diamond.
How is it imperfect? Like, what's not working?
I would have preferred more investment into the actual job creators without so many obstacles. And so a couple of weeks ago this week we saw JCB show up, a Standard Aero show up and say, we're ready to hire, we're ready to train. And what we did is we as a city said, okay, here is this allotment of money, go train, go hire. We know that works, right? We know that giving these.
I mean, do we know that works? I mean, how is that not corporate welfare?
Well,
I mean, because this is training that before there was this pot of money that private companies would have done on their own. And now there's a fund available. So why not? I mean, if you're a company, why not seek out that money?
I think your colleague Terry Castillo was the one who called this like subsidized internships, and so you're basically paying companies for what they would have done anyway.
Which is what everybody said in 2003 when the city of San Antonio gave a little bit north of $120 million as part of an incentive program to Toyota Motor Manufacturing. Today, that has
right, but I mean that's a different thing. I mean, because you're not extracting
to your argument,
but you're not extracting any kind of. Yeah, they have to pay for companies that accept these grants. They have to pay $18 an hour. It's not about job creation. I mean, it's not. So, like, how is that justifiable?
For us, it's job creation. And so this is what I said on the dais: is I don't care where you show up to work, so long as what you're showing up to is a job that is dignified, that is safe, right? And that you're bringing home the amount of dollars that you need in order to reach and achieve generational wealth so that you and your children can get out of generational poverty, right? Whether or not that job is in the building that belongs to a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or whether or not it's in the building of a mom and pop shop, is less important to me than do you have a job?
But do you think the San Antonio voters in 2020 believed that that's what the money was going to be used for? Or did they think solely in terms of people who were either unemployed or underemployed getting the training they needed for better jobs?
Yeah, I think the San Antonio voter, going back and asking them what it is that they were pitched, right? I mean, if you'd gone back in time and gone back to the polls, what are you voting for? I think they were voting for a jobs program. Period, right? And in many instances, I think most of them would have said, we are getting people back to work, right? Because everybody was feeling the acute shock of that one, of the COVID crisis back then. Today, with the luxury of 2020 hindsight, many people are now saying, well, wait a second, I voted for a program that would upskill and then would place you at the mom and pop shop taqueria so that the mom and pop shop taqueria could also benefit. I challenged that. I was at the polls that day, right? Everybody who went and pulled that lever was just voting to put people back to work so we can get out of this cataclysmic job crisis that we were in. Right. And back then, nobody was being picky about where it is that what jobs they were going to be placed at. People just wanted jobs that paid well.
I mean, is part of the problem with Ready to Work then? Is it trying to do too much? I mean, it seems like you've got a lot of mission creep going on.
Yeah.
And the vote you took last week, I would consider part of that.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things about leadership and one of the things about big behemoth projects like this is that you have to adapt with the new facts that come available to you after, or as you move forward, right? I don't think there's anything flip-floppy or anything, or anything weak about saying, wait a second, we got new facts, right? There's new elements that we have to plug into our calculus. Let's shift, let's adapt. I think we've done that. And sometimes people will look at that, adapting as, oh, there he goes, changing his mind. Or, oh my gosh, they're mission creeping. I would tell you we're mission perfecting. Laura Barberena and I were talking about this yesterday, is that, in any other industry, if you get new facts and you change your mind and you say, okay, we got to shift directions so we can improve and continuously improve, you'd be lauded as, a person who is, is able to do that, right? Except that doesn't apply in policymaking or politics, right? If at any point you get new facts and you need to shift, you are going to get a very loud cacophony of people saying, flip-flopper.
So you don't think it's the case? You could look at Ready to Work from the outside and say, yeah, it's going slower than most people expected. And the rate of their placing graduates into jobs within 6 months is abysmal. It's 46%. The target was 80%.
Right.
Are these two pilot programs that's basically cutting checks to private sector companies? Is this a way of saying, okay, well, we've got the money, it's got to go somewhere. So we might as well do this.
Yeah. So I've been in the rooms where these discussions happen. That's never been the sentiment expressed, right? We really do have people who are in good faith trying to solve a problem. You remember the people who are solving these problems are San Antonians too, right? Whose neighbors and relatives are also in need of jobs. And so everybody is coming at this with the best of intentions. And I can see why folks on the outside, armed with a little bit of cynicism and mistrust for government, sometimes will default to something like that, right? In this instance, I can reassure you that Mike Ramsey and Ben Peavy and everybody who's involved in this and all the outside organizations, they really are trying to solve a problem, and they're pouring all of themselves into this, and they are as frustrated as all of you and as the listeners are for it not having hit the targets that all of us had hoped it would hit by now. But I am really proud of them for maintaining optimism during this time. I mean, a lot of people would have thrown in the towel faced with some of these difficulties, but they keep showing up to work every single day, with the same purpose of trying to get people back to work.
I wanted to ask you about the charter review process.
Yeah.
We've got the Charter Review Commission. They're in in the process of getting recommendations together to present to the city council. And we'll probably have charter amendments on the ballot in November. And among the issues they're looking at are increasing city council pay, adding city council districts has been talked about, lifting the cap on the city manager's tenure and pay. I kind of wanted to break down all these issues individually and get your take on them. Sure. Council pay, we got that was approved by voters a few years back, but it wasn't indexed. And now, with the cost of living increases, I think there are concerns that it's too tough on council members. And along those lines, I wanted to correct something a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about this issue, and I think we mentioned that Jalen McKee Rodriguez is still working as a teacher. He's no longer working as a teacher, but he has, I think, for part of his time on council. But it's challenging for council members to get by on, at least for some of them to get by on council pay. What's your take on that issue?
I'll tell you that I think back to one of the council members I admire the most in the history of all city council, Patty Radel. Mm-hmm. Right? Patty Radel was paid peanuts. Right? I mean, she was one of the beneficiaries of that $20.
This was $20 a week thing. Yeah.
And Patty Radel did some wonderful things. Right? Elena Guajardo was paid peanuts, and Elena Guajardo, in my mind, did great. Henry Cisneros and, a lot of people that came before us at city council did wonderful, wonderful, important work and never groused about not getting paid enough. And these were people who were making very significant sacrifices to do servant leadership, right? That's the point of this whole thing, is servant leadership. When I hear then that, for the same amount of work that Patty put into it and that Henry put into it and Elena put into it and Juan Solis, et cetera, that we should now be getting paid six figures. It kind of shocks me because it feels like it's tone deaf to a few things. One, it's tone deaf to the fact that we've got 250,000 people in San Antonio at or below the poverty line. It's tone deaf to the very solid, important work that those men and women that came before me did. It's almost, I feel like it's pejorative to the contributions that they made, because I'll be honest with you, there's nobody at City Hall that works harder than Patty Radel did. Mm-hmm. There's nobody at City Hall that worked harder than Julian Castro did. And so I don't think that we deserve a 117% pay raise.
Are you in favor of any kind of raise?
I'm really not.
Okay.
I think that until this city is able to help its most vulnerable in much more impactful ways, then paying us more ought to be a carrot, right? As opposed to just something.
Do you think we should have stayed at $20 a week and $100 for the mayor?
I don't. I do think that something needs to, parking at this point costs more than $20 a week, right? But I don't think it should have been at $20 a week. What I do think, however, is that we have this crisis that I keep hearing about, like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. You guys aren't getting paid enough and people can't make it. I've been a student of city council for about 30 years now. Actively working with city council for about 23 in my, in whatever capacity, in my outside role as a lawyer and on boards and commissions. Since that time, only one person has had to remove themselves from city council because of, their tight economic situation, Ana Sandoval. Yeah. And there's an old saying in Mexico, right? Una golondrina no hace un verano, right? Which is just because you see one bird doesn't mean that summer has started, right? And I would say that hers is an outlier case. It's not an emergency that was created because one person out of 60 has, was unable to make it.
I will say that, and this is from the era when they were getting paid $20 a week, so it was more difficult then. But I know that Sheila McNeil, when she was on the council, she was having trouble just paying her bills on a monthly level, and was having to get some help sometimes from friends, on the at least one friend on the council who was helping her.
The point for me is, and I keep hearing about this, and I know all the arguments, and you and I have actually spoken about this on the phone at one point. I know all the arguments. I agree with some and I don't agree with others. But the one thing that I think that we all need to agree on first before the outset of this is that we're really only talking about 11 people here, right? We've a city of 1.5 million people and 250,000 of them are facing cataclysmic poverty, right? Or about to. And everybody's wringing their hands over what 11 people get paid.
But city staffers get paid well.
And they should.
Yeah.
And they should. And it's a job market. And we are competing for the best talent ever, right? Now, since we've started paying people from $20 all the way up to $20 to $45,000, can anybody in this room tell me that we've got more ethical, smarter, more capable, more motivated city council members than before? Ever since we started paying $45,000, or let me ask you this: had we paid Alan Warwick or Kike Martin $45,000, would we have had their debacle happen?
This is the tough thing, because it's always, it's a very effective. It's going to be a very, very effective argument against council pay increases this year, because you can't. How do you quantify? How can you say? How can you prove we've got better council members than we did before? They're producing more than they did before. You can't really. It's hard to prove something like that.
Yeah, and one argument I think for paying six figures is you'll have council members who won't feel compelled to work a second job, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if that's actually true or not. I know that that doesn't stop county commissioners who make six figures from having work on the side. But you personally, how much of your week is devoted to council work, and how much to your legal practice?
Yeah, and so work with a capital W or work with a lowercase w, because I'm serious, right?
Yeah.
Much of our week is dedicated to ribbon cuttings, going to galas, having dinner with Walter Cerna.
Who's a lobbyist, by the way. Walter Cerna is a lobbyist.
going to the clips with 500 students, and celebrating out there with the Spurs and all that.
Yeah.
Is that work? Is that capital W work? Right. By the way, when I do that, I get to park anywhere I want. Right. And also, being a city of San Antonio person, a council person, is the closest thing to royalty in San Antonio, right? Please, nobody out there think that our job, that we are suffering and that woe is me, right?
I thought Victor Wembanyama was as close to royalty.
That as city council members. And so I will tell you that whenever city council members tell you, but I put 80 hours a week in there. Yeah, but how many of those were at the real estate council's fight night, right? Or at the gala for the Hispanic Chamber, right? So let's be serious about how much of it is it really capital W office work, the same kind of work that everybody who's listening today would do, less than you think. Not a lot, but still less than you think, right? So capital W work, I would tell you we put in a good 40 hours. But I've got a team of people who work for me who put in more than that, right? But our job is many orders of magnitude easier because of the work that Eric Walsh and his team do, right? They tee it up and we hit it out of the park, right? And it makes us look like geniuses. All the credit that us city council people take for, like, you see that street? I repaved that street for you. No, we didn't. Right? No, we didn't. Right?
With your bare hands.
Right. Yeah. Right. I hired an extra 100 police officers for you. No, we didn't. We took one vote. Right. Eric Walsh went and vetted these people, hired them, trained them. Right. And so we also sort of fall into the trap as we break our own arms off, patting ourselves on the back, congratulating ourselves. We sometimes do that at the expense of the hard work of the people upon whose shoulders we stand.
It looks like the idea to add council districts. My sense is that this is probably not going to happen. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It would be a tricky thing. And
I can only tell you that in my 7 years on city council, no one has ever walked up to me and said, "You know what, Councilman Peláez, we need 2 more of you." Nobody's ever said that, right? Nobody has ever said, "Gosh, my problems would be solved faster." And my if only we had 12 council members. I will tell you,
I wouldn't think a constituent is going to be thinking along those lines. But somebody like you, who how uneven these districts get over time, and how difficult it is to sort them out with each new census. Looking at it from, a higher standpoint, like you might think.
You would. And so to be serious,
you need 2 more.
You're not wrong. You're serious, right? And there is a solid argument to be made for, at the very least, analyzing whether or not it's time. I will tell you that a council office, one council person with about 9 or 10 staffers, is a multi-million-dollar line item on the budget, right? Whereas if the argument is we need San Antonio's population is growing, therefore we need more coverage on the ground, and we need to be able to execute on constituent services a little bit quickly.
More staff members.
You could staff each office with 1 or 2 new staffers and save yourself many millions of dollars and still have excellent results. And so in my office, We operate my office like a customer service call center, right? And it's totally data informed and it's metrics led. And, we are always doing customer satisfaction, inquiries with the people that we touch. And I hope that that's the way the other council offices run. But if they were to run that way, I would argue that instead of 2 council districts, you could use, 1 new person at each office to make that the constituent services knife a little sharper.
For someone who didn't see your rollout and is just tuning in,
Do you want to pause so you can go back?
It's only we could do that. I got it right here. The video is 3 minutes.
So who doesn't,
Right.
sitting here and tuning in? Why are you running for mayor? And why will you be the best choice in 2025?
So San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the United States, in what is, I think, the 8th largest economy on the planet. It is time that we start acting like the 7th largest city in the United States. And by that, I mean really coming to terms with the fact that, one, we are experiencing some complex, very serious big city problems that are going to require sophisticated solutions, right? 2, that we're no longer running City Hall, a building full of people who are just doing public works and trash pickup and chasing stray dogs, right? We are a vertically integrated enterprise of 13,000 people with an annual budget that exceeds $3 billion, approaching 4 now, right? The next mayor is going to be taking the reins at a very important historical inflection point for the city, right? 1 is managing a post-COVID city where the economy is changing dramatically as we speak, right? The next mayor has to be ready to address what looks like a commercial real estate crisis hurtling our way, right? That nobody's talking about. The next mayor, number 2, is going to have to fight tooth and nail and go to the mattresses to protect CPS. What is coming down this next legislative session, what we're hearing is that CPS is at very real peril. And that the governor and lieutenant governor have their knife sharpened for our ability to manage our own utility. 3, I say this often, nobody writes songs or poems about Plano, right? Think about that. And the reason is because but they do around San Antonio. We're very special. We're special in a certain regard. There's some sort of element of authenticity that is worth fighting for and preserving and wrapping in bubble wrap at all costs, right? Plano doesn't have what we have, which is that authenticity, that sense of familia. And for everybody, that authenticity is a little bit different. And then lastly, it is time that Washington, D.C. send us our money back, right? That we finally go up there and actually have the ability to plead and advocate our case, right? And make sure that Military City gets its due. We shouldn't be out there begging for a single nonstop flight, right? I mean, we ought to be asking for a lot more. We ought not to be debating whether or not it's okay if we ask the government one more time to send us, a little bit of money for our migrant resource center. We ought to be at the table talking about fixing we San Antonians be at the table fixing immigration, reform. I think it's time for a mayor to actually approach San Antonio and say, it's okay to be a big city while maintaining that small city feel, but we are a big city, it's okay. Embracing complexity is literally my job. That's what I've done since 2003 when I first started at Toyota, thrown into the deep end on a multi-billion-dollar project. Embracing complexity is what I did when I took over Brooks City Base as their chairman, hired Leo, and brought it back from dust and ashes, if you will, right? Embracing complexity is what I've done in economic development on my commission and with the help of Jenna Salcedo and everybody. So I do think you're going to need a mayor who is able to not just embrace that complexity, but articulate it and distill it down so that you can get everybody's voices at the table. I've only got one opponent so far, right? So I'm not going to talk about what the other folks bring to the table because I have no idea what their arguments are. But I love John Courage. I really do. He's a really nice man. And for those of you that have met him, he makes you feel warm and fuzzies, doesn't he? And he's got some great ideas for running Plano, for running Peoria, Illinois, and for running Lockhart, Texas. Those are, simple, keep it simple, steady hand at the wheel. And that message resonates with a certain kind of voter bloc who yearns for 1968 San Antonio, when San Antonio was still that small town where everything seemed like it was under control. but that's not the way that you manage a sophisticated major city on the world stage.
Did Plano hurt you? That's 3 times. Manny, what did Plano do to
There
you?
was a girl I dated in high school.
Okay,
you know who you are. You know who you are.
We knew it.
Back to that. Oh,
Okay. It all makes sense now. Before we go on to the next issue, I want to wrap up the discussion on the charter review.
Oh, yeah.
Situation. The last one I wanted to ask you about was involved the city manager tenure ban, and I'm pretty sure that you would support lifting those caps. So, I mean, if otherwise, Eric Walsh would be forced out in a couple of years.
It's a labor market, right? I mean, when the next time Eric Walsh has a conversation with his wife and his wife says, it's time to quit your job. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of town or if he is termed out, we are going to go to the labor market and look for the best city manager in the nation, because I think everybody agrees San Antonio deserves the best city manager in the nation. And there's a labor market for that. And there is a competitive wage for that. And if we find the best candidate out there and that candidate says, all right, pitch me. Why should I go to San Antonio? We'll say all the things that we love and hold dear about San Antonio. And we'll say, and as a perk, after 8 years, we're going to fire you, right? But we'll also pay you way below market rate, right? Who in their right mind would move their family, right, to do that? But also, that is not the way you run a vertically integrated mega billion-dollar enterprise, right? You need someone who will provide a steady hand and leadership from the top down. And that person won't be able to do that while they're looking at the clock, watching that 8 years tick down, right? So I get it. There's, again, this cap was put in place by a fire union who wasn't too happy with the previous city council, the city manager, and they did it really as a way to push her out, and they succeeded in that. But they got us pregnant with a very serious problem, which is, what if the next city manager is excellent and everybody loves the city manager and wants to keep the city manager? And so I hope nobody here is naive enough to think that we're not having conversations with the fire union about, undoing that. My hope is that they'll be partners in undoing that.
Now you were talking about it in a pretty forward-looking way. Like if you have to go out to the labor market, finding the best talent. But a lot of this seems driven by, at least in the business community, not about thinking about the city manager after Eric Walsh, but keeping Eric Walsh.
Yes.
Is that your motivation?
That is my motivation.
To keep Eric, not necessarily looking forward to the next, what comes after.
Both. Yes, and, right? So, yes, I think Eric has done an excellent job. I think Eric has exceeded my expectations. I think Eric has.
How has he done that?
Well, our in the face of COVID, our ratings. Our Moody's and Fitch and S&P, they still think that we're the bee's knees, right? That's hard to do in the face of this tornado of this economic tornado that is ripping this country apart at that time, right? Number two, I don't know. I mean, maybe you didn't see, but our off-system sales at CPS, they're bringing in an astonishing amount of revenue that allows us to do some really wonderful things that other cities aren't able to do, right? We continue to protect the aquifer. Our airport is back. We're now busting at the seams at the airport. We're back to pre-COVID numbers, 10 million people plus an additional 30 million people that drive in. Our tourism economy is humming. Now, I mean, if only Eric could get Coach Popovich and the Spurs to come up with a better way of defending themselves.
Speaking of the Spurs.
We're going to ask you about that.
Nice segue.
But I have I respect Eric's work, right?
Right.
Now, yes,
You're not
there's a
getting
lot
out
of
of Spurs,
construction.
by the
There's a lot of construction. I can't wait. But there's a lot of construction downtown. It's very inconvenient. There's always a complicated, big behemoth of a city to run, and with that will always come some difficulties. And I think that he's resolved those difficulties quite elegantly. And so, yes, the answer to your question is yes. And at the same time, if God forbid tomorrow Eric gets hit by a VIA bus and is no longer to come to work, we still have the immediate problem of needing to hire a city manager who is going to be enticed to come here and told, hey, and until the voters change the charter, you and your children are going to be moving here, but just know that you're going to have to uproot them after 8 years. That, I mean, for the next city manager's spouse, that's a non-starter. That's a deal breaker, right?
Last September, the city council, in approving its budget, that budget included $500,000 reproductive justice fund, and the council is kind of having discussions now about one part of it that's been discussed, which would fund out-of-state travel for women seeking abortions. And this is in the context of a Texas that has an extremely restrictive abortion ban. And so I think you have expressed opposition to the idea of using part of the Reproductive Justice Fund to fund travel for women in those situations.
So, so first of all, just to be precise, the number that we're looking at is 100,000, right? So of those 500,000, 100,000 is set aside or is being proposed to be used for possibly transporting women from San Antonio to other states so that they can obtain abortion, which, by the way, I'll just tell you right now so there's nobody out there who questions where I'm coming from. Abortion is healthcare, right? I believe healthcare is a human right. I think abortion is something to which women should have access to. I'll never know what it's like to be a woman in need of an abortion, finds myself in that unfortunate position. But I do believe that there's no man out there who should ever be telling women what to do in their bodies or getting in between them and their relationship with their doctors. That said, we have now presented with this proposal to pay $100,000 to pay for women to travel to get abortions. Even before we voted on it, we've already spent $135,000 on attorney's fees, by the way, defending what might be a vote on that. I don't think that by the time, I don't think we should be paying to using tax dollars, local municipal tax dollars for that purpose.
So you would support like private entities doing it, but you don't think
I would very much support private entities to do that, and they're doing it, by the way, and they're doing it without $100,000 from the city of San Antonio, right? Number two, even though I am a supporter and an ally of the organizations out there who are supporting women to, who in this much needed access to abortion fight. Even though I am that, I don't think cities are all things to all people, nor should we be, right? And by that I mean municipal governments aren't all things to all people. Because at the same time, an argument can also be made that we ought to be paying for tax attorneys to help people get their taxes filed or get out of tax liens, that we ought to be paying for people's family law attorneys so that they can fight for custody, that we ought to, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we could also be doing, right? What we could do with this entirety of the $500,000, including that 100, is a lot of things up to but not including. A lot of things that wouldn't include that transportation component, because there's a lot of those things around which we can get everybody to rally behind. For example, access to vaccinations for human papillomavirus, right? Access to helping people, educate them and helping them navigate the insurance market so that they can all avail themselves of Medicare, Medicaid, right? SNAP, et cetera. Teaching kids at all ages about healthy relationships and prophylactics. That money, by the way, most of that money is being proposed for that, right? The only thing we're arguing about is this $100,000. This $100,000, by the way, if it passes and if we do, and if city council does get this enacted into an ordinance, it'll be a victory for many, but it'll be a Pyrrhic victory, right? And by that, I mean, it'll cause more damage, right, than you will actually have gotten accomplished, because we're going to end up paying $500,000 to $1 million in attorney's fees by the time that we're done getting challenged in the Supreme Court over $100,000 spend, right? Number two, it'll probably be invalidated at the Supreme Court. I'm a lawyer. Our city attorney is probably going to strangle me when he sees me, and he's going to probably want me censured and strung up and quartered. But I disagree with any lawyer out there who tells us that, this is legal and that the current state law allows this to happen. I don't think that we're going to be allowed to happen. And so I'm not in favor of picking fights that we're guaranteed to lose. I'm almost certain that we're going to be losing this one, even if those fights are principled. I think there's better ways to do this. And this fight needs to happen at the state and federal level, which is why I'm begging everybody, for God's sake, vote. Just get out there and vote this November, right? Issues like this are solved when you vote. But when minorities and women and young people don't vote, what ends up happening is you got a bunch of old dudes up in Austin who are telling young women what to do with their bodies, right? And no matter whether we put 100,000, 200,000, $1 million or $5 million into this pot, this problem will continue to persist until we solve Austin.
A few months ago, you signed on to a resolution along with Terry Castillo and Jill McKeon-Rodriguez calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and then you changed your mind and decided you didn't want to support it. You've talked about that since then, but if you could, for people who maybe don't know what your reasoning was on that.
My district, District 8, enjoys and boasts the largest populations of Muslims, Palestinians, and otherwise, and also the largest population of Jewish families. And I don't know why, but that's just something that just happens in District 8. They all want to live there. And it's almost certain that's because they love their council member. There may be other reasons, but
the Met Center has nothing to do with it. USA has
nothing to do with it at all.
Right, yeah.
But one of the things that we'd been getting calls about in my office was same week, imams and rabbis saying, please send extra police officers to patrol. Please make sure that they're, plain clothes during our services because we're afraid, right? Because invariably, whenever there's a flare up, there's always going to be some knucklehead out there who does something moronic and horrible at either a synagogue or at a mosque. We did that. Right. Then we start hearing from our friends at the JCC and other Jewish-owned and Muslim-owned businesses and at the Muslim Children's Education Center. We're also afraid of tagging, of property destruction, of harassment outside of our mosques, right, and our synagogues. Can you please help educate the public about, what our rights are, how to defend ourselves, and alert police to the fact that we could, to keep an extra close eye out for us, because invariably there's always some knucklehead when the Middle East flares up like this, right? That does stupid things. Then we start hearing from schools telling us that kids who are both Jewish and Muslim are getting more bullied. And on top of that, the school districts are prohibiting teachers from even talking about Israel or Palestine with them. And so there's these kids out there without their trusted advisors to help them navigate these difficult moments. And we start hearing from mental health providers in my district saying, hey, for the first time ever, we're medicating Jews and Muslims alike because their families are in imminent risk of death. City councilman, what do you think about that? And I went home and I was like, my gosh, this is a District 8 local problem, right? This is a really genuine geopolitical problem that has landed in my district, and it's incumbent upon me to address it. I met with the pro-Palestinian protesters. I met with Terry Castillo. And I think what we fashioned was a statement, one sentence statement that said, right, we call for an end to the violence, a ceasefire, and a return of all protesters, which, by the way, everybody I know agrees with that, right? Like, how about
return of all hostages?
Return of all hostages, right? Stop killing each other and return the hostages. Every decent person I know believes that should happen, right? And we moved forward, proposed, signed the 3-signature memo, and everything looked fine until I started getting calls from very, very, very angry Jews and from very angry Muslims and very angry Palestinians, all saying, my gosh, you've poked the bear, you've touched the third rail of politics on this one. And it became evident that my ceasefire resolution was causing more disruption and more pain and more chaos, right? And it also became evident that people inside and outside city council were intent on, when that resolution was going to be presented to city council, were intent on creating some chaos and being very hurtful. And then the third reason was I went and I talked to the rest of my city council members, and there was not 6 votes. The only people who were going to vote yes was myself, District 2, and Terry Castillo. And I thought to myself, I had to go home and really think through, do I want to send up to City Hall a losing resolution that is going to drag people through the mud, break hearts, bring people out and expose and put them vulnerable to their most vulnerable feelings? And I thought, this subject deserves more solemnity and more dignity. I'm going to pull my name back and just have these conversations privately and in other ways than in having to make people endure what was going to be a circus.
I guess the obvious question is, didn't you anticipate the possibility or the likelihood of that kind of opposition going into it? And then did you have concerns about committing yourself to something and then reversing yourself when you've committed to your colleagues?
I anticipated difficult conversations. I'd anticipated that there would be, folks out there who were going to try to make chaos out of something this serious. What I hadn't anticipated was that it would get 0 votes from the other council members, and that's what really sort of tipped me over into the space where I knew I'd had to pull this back, right? I thought we could handle everything, but handling everything and then having to have those people endure the sight of their city council members not support them in the least bit, I just thought was not, was just going to be bad in general. And so, like we had talked earlier, armed with that new information that there was not going to be 6 votes, I decided to adapt and shift and go in another direction. It brought about a visceral, violent reaction from a lot of my friends on the far left, people who were really, really looking forward to having this debate at City Hall. Manny's a flip-flopper. Manny doesn't care about Palestinians. Manny is pro-genocide. That certainly, again, their First Amendment right to be taken, to be heard and to say those things. But the reality is that I still think I made the right decision in the end. And I've had to make my tour, my traveling roadshow of apology to a lot of the Muslim and Jewish community in town for having them put them through this just by proposing this. Thankfully, I've been met with a lot of folks who were, who all agreed. Manny, it's clear that, you had the best intentions at heart. Manny, it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And, and thanks for reaching out to us. And most people just more than anything wanted to be heard. And I feel like I've heard them. And there's some folks out there that unless they get a vote at city council, then, in their minds, the genocide will continue. And make no mistake that what's happening over there in Israel and in Palestine is a human obscenity, the likes of which I have never seen before, and how anybody can be okay with what's happening over there just boggles my mind.
Before we wrap things up, I want to return to an issue that Greg raised, which is the possibility of a new Spurs Arena. We've learned that UTSA is going to be moving the Institute of Texan Cultures from its present building in Hemisphere area. People are wondering about whether that could be a possible site for a Spurs Arena. If elected mayor, how are you going to approach this issue?
Well, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to approach it right now during this interview.
Okay. That's what I was hoping for.
I am I don't know if you know this, right? But I'm an arbitrator mediator, right? That's what I do for a living. I'm a judge for hire, right, if you will. There's a certain case I'm hearing right now on which I am an arbitrator that prohibits me from commenting about that NBA Spurs team. But I can talk about plans for stadiums in general, right?
Let me just say, non-disclosure agreements are
the worst.
evil, particularly when public officials sign them.
Yeah. And so in this instance,
you're basically taking what is almost certainly going to require city financing, probably county financing, and you're saying, you can't even say You can't even say arena. I'm saying
that I can't give you some information at this podcast. This case will be over very soon, and I'll be happy to give you to spill my guts about it. But here's what I can say.
All right.
Is one, there will be an arena downtown in our lifetimes, because there has to be an arena downtown. Whether that arena is for Spurs, whether that arena is for any other team, that's what I'm talking about. Two, the great cities of the world, and we are one of them, right? And who have great sports ecosystems, celebrate those sports down in their city centers. We should do that. We've seen how executed correctly in, let's say, the Wrigley Field Entertainment District, right? We've seen how the Staples Center in Los Angeles, and we've seen a whole bunch of other examples around the United States, how when executed correctly, those become economic development generators that are the envy of all the other cities, right? We also know that we are not operating in a vacuum, right? You have plenty of cities out there who would love to steal our teams. And just ask Las Vegas and how happy they are to have been able to poach the teams from all those other cities, right? The competition to keep your teams is very, very real. Shifting over to talk about the missions, for example, right? Did you know the missions have been around for more than 100 years? I think in the 1800s, the missions were here. That is a team worth preserving. That is a team worth really considering helping them make their home downtown. Any one of our professional teams that brings in billions of dollars of investment from not just them, but from everybody around them, I think is something that we need to rally around. Some people are going to say, oh, well, the folks on the east side were made a promise and that promise was never realized, right? That's true. They were made a promise and that promise was never realized. That does not, however, preclude us from moving forward. What that means is we've got to make those people on the east side whole and figure out a way to, make sure that the damage that was done to them isn't perpetrated in perpetuity, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't look at and shouldn't look at creating something really special downtown for everybody.
So conceptually, would you be in favor of public financing?
Yes. Yeah. There's no city out there that there's no city out there with an asset that big in its downtown that doesn't have some element of public financing. financing. And I don't see how the deal gets done without some public financing.
I mean, if you're talking just hypothetically about an NBA arena, those run about $1 billion.
They're very expensive.
Minimum these days. Should the city cover that entire $1 billion?
I don't see how it's going to be done without the county and the city covering part of that. Mm-hmm. I try to think through a scenario where it's just the county covering it. I still the math in my head doesn't work if the city sits out. So yes, there have to be for it to work. Unless somebody can show me otherwise, right now it looks like the city would have to step in and do that. But the question is when, right? Is it going to happen during this mayor's term, or will it happen on the next mayor's term? These deals are so astronomically sophisticated and big. It's really not just a matter of signing a one-page memorandum of understanding and let's go start knocking down buildings. Right. It's not the way it works.
It would be kind of surprising if anything could get done before Nuremberg leaves office, right? I mean, it seems unlikely that there's going to be a deal between the city, county, and Spurs. Is that possible? I mean, before that, the next year.
Anything's possible, right? I think what you'll see first is groundwork. Right. So right now, everybody's talking about what to do with the Institute of Texan Cultures building. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's the target destination for a future arena district, live, work, play, all that in there. I do think that before Mayor Nuremberg's time, you'll probably see that building knocked down. It breaks my heart that building would be knocked down. I mean, there's a lot of people who have very, very, very beautiful memories, and there's an emotional connection they have with that building. But it seems that that's UTSA's plan. Having looked at what's inside that building and the problems that building's currently facing, it is so expensive just to keep it standing. And right now, it is not fit for restoration or fit for habitation of people or people being able to come in and out of it. So I hate that building is so dilapidated and has not been maintained the way it should have been over the years. But we are looking forward. We're not looking backward in this instance. Man, this was easy. I thought you guys were going to ask me about, was it the horse carriage stuff? But forget it. That was dedicated all to. Wasn't this the horse carriage?
There are only so many hours in the day,
we'll do a whole episode.
There you go. That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming in podcast, and we really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, we thank you for listening, and we're going to be back again next week. Take care.
Thanks.